character is always associated with colonialism. All right, he could be just a product of colonial discourse. That's what the main argument of Tayyip Saleh here. Okay, so very simply, I explained this for you because I want you to see exactly visually and to understand, of course, is the germ becomes a key word in Saleh's novel here. All right, so the germ, the word germ is a key word. And what do we know about a germ? We're not going to talk about coronavirus today, okay? The virus is very deadly, it's very contagious, and it's transmitted by blood. Well, germ is transmitted by touch, okay? So this germ that Mustafa Said is talking about is deadly, all right? A deadly disease, contagious, infectious, means it can infect others very quickly and in a very short time. And it's transmitted by blood, which means that here actually we refer to the mixed marriage, which when you mix bloods, then there is this germ being transmitted from the colonial property subjects to the colonialists to the colonial subjects. Okay, so I took here a few words which are very important of this guy. This is a writer called Samara Attar's words. Okay, so the violence of the conqueror has become contagious germ in the blood of the conquered. The victim does not only forgot the word want here, does not only want to imitate his victimizer in scientific achievement, but also in the avalanche of murder. All right, so look at the germ and its effects. So germ of colonial discourse is transmitted in a way that that the colonized or the colonial subject wants to imitate the colonizer in every single characteristic, for example. Okay, so look again at this quote here. The violence of the conqueror has become a contagious germ in the blood of the conquered. Violence. Okay, so which means it's another word, another way of saying that if I am ever a violent character or violent person, just don't blame me because I got this from you guys, from the colonialist subjects. All right, so that's a germ that was transmitted into my blood by you. The victim, which is Mustafa Said here, does not only want to imitate his victimizer in scientific achievement, but also in the avalanche of murder. So, and here we think about two things: that the intellect of Mustafa Said, because remember, Mustafa Said went to England as a prodigy. Prodigy means a genius, a very genius guy from Sudan. And he got a scholarship to England where he studied economics, okay? And then by studying economics, he became one of the most important intellectuals in economics in England, where he lectured, or gave many lectures to the English people, all right? So the imitation, all right? The germ is the cause of the imitation. Because of this germ, which is contagious and deadly, the victim wants to imitate the victimizer, which is the colonialist subject, the colonizer, in both scientific achievements, and this is what the intellectual abilities of Mustafa Said stand for, but also in the avalanche of murder, and also he's a murderer. So imagine, this is like a very crazy identity, being both a high intellectual and a murderer at the same time. But this is just a copy, or a copyrighted copy of the colonizer himself. Now, I want to remind you of Hanan's warning. Don't forget about this. I think I talked about this during Heart of Darkness, and I said that Fanon, very simply in The Wretch of the Earth, is reminding the colonized or the victim not to imitate, because the European white man is not a good model for imitation. So emulation is much better, which means you do better, you go better, far better than the colonizer. Okay, you remember probably the whole man, the idea of the whole man. You remember? Okay, great. So this is why we need to be careful about the use of the germ here, And when we talk about that, you remember these passages all over the structure of the novel, where this is where we encounter a germ of fatal disease, and fatal disease, a deadly disease. All right. So colonialism for Tayyip Saleh is a very fatal disease. No more than that. It's something which is bad, ugly. It doesn't yield any positive results. Okay, germ of disinfection. So how sad it would be if either of my sons grew up with germ of disinfection. I want actually to explain this a little bit because it's a little bit different from colonialism, but it's the same on many levels. Okay. So when Mustafa Said said how sad it would be if either or both my sons grew up with the germ of disinfection in them, the wanderlust. Wanderlust is again a word that has been repeated probably like 3 times in the novel, at least 2 times in the novel, wanderlust, all right? Which means that Mustafa Said is a wanderer. He's a mobile subject from Sudan to Cairo, from first one of the villages next to Khartoum, then to Khartoum, to Cairo, and then to England, and back to the narrator's village, okay, at the bank of the Nile. So this mobility or wanderlust is just another type of germ, another problem for Tayyip Saleh in his novel, that he moved between different parts until we have come with this problem of identity. You don't know, you no more, you're neither from the south nor from the north. And we're going to discuss this later in issues of identity and East and West and Orientalism in the next lecture. All right, let's stick now to colonial discourse and post-colonial discourse. Okay, so again, when we talk about this violence here, the British imported to us the germ of greatest European violence, the germ of a deadly disease that struck them more than 1,000 years ago. All right? So violence again. We talk about violence, look at this again. The violence, the idea is that the violence of the conqueror has become a contagious germ in the blood of the conqueror. Okay? So the victim wants to imitate, to copy the colonizer. So it's a message to the colonizer saying that all that you produce, you generate, is just a false copy of an immoral man, very simply. Okay, that's a very critical point that criticizes, of course, colonial discourse in the novel. Now, I want you to look at this again, this passage here by Mustafa Said. The white man, merely because he has ruled us for a period of our history, will for a long time continue to have for us that feeling of contempt the strong have for the weak. Again, the white man, merely because he has ruled us for a period of our history, will for a long time continue to have for us that feeling of contempt the strong have for the weak. All right, this is Mustafa Said on page 50. So when you read the novel, of course, you encounter the white civilization, the white man, the civilizing mission, the white man's burden. I mean, issues that remind you of of the La Mission Civilisatrice again. All right, so. But what is more important in this novel is not just the failure of the white man's burden or civilizing mission, but the outcomes that it produces, the effects that it has generated over history. That's what is more important. That's more about the arguments in the novel, okay? So very simply, because this passage here holds the legacy of colonialism, okay? Which means that there is some continuity, there's an ongoing impact. This is what is worse, is that the ongoing impact of colonial discourse is always there. It's ongoing, all right? This is why they will continue, he said, Mustafa said, they will continue to have for us the feeling of contempt and hatred, all right? So it's kind of some form of a neo-colonialism, what we call neo-colonialism. And this is what we mean, what I mean to refer to an ongoing impact in the form of internal corruption. And I'll still detect one, I mean, in a short while, we're going to see a very beautiful passage about this trope of this issue here. Okay, so similar treatment, similar damage from fellows or compatriots. All right, this is the idea in the passage here. What do we mean? I will explain all of these points, okay? So this hatred or contempt is stuck to Said's character and movements. All right, so the idea, the point here is that the colonizer has always had and will always have some content. And this content is just like the content the strong have for the weak. So the superiority issue, inferiority dichotomy, of course, okay? And then the problem is that this contempt and hatred and racial discourse is going to be transmitted not only to be played on the strings of the dichotomous opposition of the colonizer and the colonized, but it's going to be a copy that will take place inside the natives' lands. And there will be two different categories of classes, or two social classes, a powerful social class and a weak social class. And there will always be this contempt and hatred from the powerful social class inside the colonized territories to or towards the lower social classes. Okay, so this is another point, is that this Mustafa Said is stuck to this issue of hatred and contempt is stuck to Said's character and movements. So when you think about Mustafa Said in a novel, you see that he's a person or a character that is full of hatred. Why? And contempt. Why? Because he made his girls, the white girls, commit suicide. It was the reason behind their suicide. That's one. He murdered one of them. So he's a murderer. So he went even far to be a murderer, to murder, not just to be, to hold feelings of contempt and hatred. Okay? So the colonial discourse is very damage inflicting in this sense here again. Okay, so I'll explain these points further and better. So look at this dialogue between the colonizer and colonized in the novel. So I don't remember the page, but I think it's around 50s or 60s. Or anyway, I can give you the page if you want, but I want you to go back to your versions and read this. Okay. So there was a dialogue between Mansour and Richard. So between local, a Sudanese guy and a British white man. You transmitted to us the disease of your capitalist economy. What did you give us except for a handful of capitalist companies that drew off our blood and still do? This is a great discussion between Mansour and Richard. So I hope you understand this. And Richard responds to him, all this shows that you cannot manage to live without us. You used to complain about colonialism, and when we left, you created the legend of neo-colonialism. It seems that our presence in an open and undercover form is as indispensable to you as air and water. So this sums it all. And Richard and Mansour just said it all and said it best. Okay? So Mansour was complaining, was attacking, was reacting, was giving a message that the colonial enterprise does nothing except it really sucks the blood of natives, and it takes away the riches of the native countries. You transmitted to us the disease of your capitalist economy. So it's not only about colonialism, it's all a form of economic system, which is capitalism. All right, based on what? Based on taking a lot of riches, of course, based on the higher social class, monopolizes the lower social class, and so on and so forth. What did you give us except for a handful of capitalist companies? So you gave us some companies, yeah, that's good, but they are capitalists, and what they do is they suck off. They draw off our blood and still do. All right, which means that Mansour here is aware that the civilizing mission in its economic version or economic form, of course, is just doing nothing but taking more then give in. That's what happened, okay? And Richard responds to Mansour and he says, you're just living in an illusion, in the middle of an illusion. All this shows that you cannot manage to live without us, okay? So this is superiority. This is colonial stereotyping. This is ethnocentrism, okay? Because the colonizer, the white man, of course, assumes that he must be there to manage. If he cannot manage or he doesn't manage, nobody else, or the native cannot, he's not able to manage. They must be represented, they can't represent themselves. This is another way, another quote from Karl Marx used by Edward Said in his book, okay? You used to complain about colonialism. So look at Richard, what he said. You used to complain about colonialism. So the days or the times of colonial encroachments, everybody or natives were complaining about colonialism. But when we left, okay, you got your independence, guys. Now you're okay, you're settled. You created the legend of neo-colonialism. Now this is an ongoing story between the West and the East, all right? Is it really a legend? Was this neo-colonialism because of the colonizer or because of the elite inside our native territories? That's what happened. Was it an internal problem or still legacy of colonial discourse and colonialism? It seems that our presence in an open or undercover form is indispensable to you as air and water. So can you believe this? I mean, can you imagine how the ethnocentric views of the white man says that we are indispensable. You can't do without us, all right? Even if we're in open or undercover, which means are we explicitly here or implicitly, you can't do anything without us, without resorting to us, okay? So this is an ongoing dialogue between the East and the West today. So this little or mini dialogue between Mansour and Richard summarizes the trauma of the natives. It summarizes the trauma of the problem of neo-colonialism, actually, because a lot of people got independence. Yes, that's true. That's right. Okay. But what happened is that now they talk about this legend of neo-colonialism. They accuse still the colonizer to have left the impact behind. Okay. This is what happens here. So to prove this, I would love you to go back to a very important, let me go back to the novel again, okay? And you look at this slide here. So I have to admit new people in, okay? Please be punctual next time. All right, so in the version I'm reading, actually, there's a very, very nice introduction by Leila Alami to the novel, of course. And she depicted different, let's say, witnessing statements from leaders just right after independence, all right? So for example, the president of Guinea, then this leader, Ahmed Sékou Touré, he said there is no dignity without liberty. We prefer liberty in poverty to wealth in slavery. Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana said, we are going to demonstrate to the world, to the other nations, that we are prepared to lay our own foundations. Patrice Lumumba in Congo, just before independence, just the moments of the end of colonial encroachments and then the beginning of independence, we are going to begin new struggle, sublime struggle, which will lead our country to peace, prosperity, and greatness. So what do you think here? We have a speech that is like a noble speech. We have speech from leaders, African leaders, that is very promising. It promises the inhabitants and the peoples that the things yet to come are very promising, are going to be very positive, and the things will be so prosperous in the country. So imagine, this is what the leaders were promising their own people. Okay? So, no long after independence, what happened to Ahmed Sékou Touré? He turned into a brutal dictator who tolerated no feedback, no reaction, no dissent. All right? So in the course of his, this is of course Leila Alami speaking, in the course of his 26-year reign, thousands of Guineans were jailed in concentration camps. So I want you to see or to look at this result, all right? And this promising statement here. There is no dignity without liberty. We prefer liberty in poverty to wealth in slavery. So there's a huge discrepancy of what the speech is about and what the reality is about. Okay? Nkrumah from Ghana started to stifle dissent in Ghana and was later overthrown in a military coup while he was on a state visit to Vietnam. So he didn't live longer. I mean, he didn't live on reign, longer on reign. He just was overthrown, okay? But Lumumba in Congo, he had even time to govern. He had no time to govern. So Leila Alami says, 3 months after his election, he was assassinated by Congolese rivals who were working in collusion with Belgian and American intelligence services. So, but what is important here is that this is one of the arguments of Tayyip Saleh in his novel. There's this discrepancy between the leader's speech that we want to get independence. We want to be free. We want to get our liberation or emancipation from the white man. But then what happens is that the trouble you get into after independence is even more dangerous, is even more damage inflicting than the colonialism itself. So if you think about these historical statements of promise, and you see the realities of the Africans, dictatorship, for example, brutality, corruption, and so on and so forth. So this is why I entitled this Internal Form of Colonialism, Corruption. So corruption, very simply, is a kind of domestic internal form of colonial discourse, of colonialism, all right? So if you go back to again, in orange means passages from the novel. The minister's speech on page 99. There was a minister's speech given to us by the narrator taking our memory or our actually critical memory to ponder this passage here. Okay, let me admit against somebody. Okay, so if we do not tear this disease by the roots, we shall have with us a bourgeoisie that is in no way connected with the reality of our life, which is more dangerous to the future of Africa than imperialism itself. So imagine, this is speech of the minister on page 99. Let me go back to page 99 now. Okay. But the beautiful thing is that look at how the narrator, because there was actually a discussion between Mahjoub and the narrator, the unnamed narrator in the novel. So the narrator was in a conference in Khartoum, all right, about leadership, about the prosperity of Africa, about getting rid of the white man, building, developing native countries, African nations, and so on and so forth, all right? And the speech of the minister was like this: if we do not tear this disease by the roots, we shall have with us a bourgeoisie that is in no way connected with the reality of our life, which is more dangerous to the future of Africa than imperialism itself. So I think that this passage just resonates very simply the previous statements of the African leaders. So these statements are no different than this speech here, or this statement of the minister. So as if Tayyip Saleh is bringing to the reader a minister character that represents straightforward, in a straightforward way and in a very clear way, the African leaders in general. So the minister here equals the African leaders, but I mean, to be apologetic, of course, or to not to exempt the white man, is politicians in general, leaders in general, just the African. So disease again, all right? If we do not tear this disease, which is colonialism, all right, and corruption, by the roots we shall have with our bourgeoisie that is in no way connected. So the narrator was talking about his speech, this minister's speech, to Mahjoub, one of the laymen in his village, all right? But look at this, or listen to this. He continued saying, I just gave you the speech of the minister to reflect, or to see his reflection, the reflection of the minister of the other African leaders, all right? How can I say to Mahjoub that this very man escapes during the summer months from Africa to his villa on Lake Lucerne, and that his wife does her shopping at Harrods in London, from where articles are flown to her in a private plane, and that the members of his delegation themselves openly say that he is corrupt and takes bribes, and he is acquiring whole estates, has set up businesses and amassed properties, has created vast fortune from the sweat dripping from the brows of wretched, half-naked people in the jungle. This is so powerful. This is one of the most wonderful passages on page 99, depicting the contradictories, the discrepancies, the paradoxes between what social class, bourgeoisie social class, is purporting to be, pretends to be again, and between the realities of the naked or half-naked and brutal, the damaged minorities, these lower classes. Okay, so Tayyip Saleh engages in this dialogue to show to the reader that this discrepancy or this paradox, controversial problem that we have inside, is first, on the one hand, left by colonialism, and second is that it's more dangerous than imperialism itself. So Saleh is criticizing very harshly colonialism by this in a dialogue form, in form of a dialogue, okay, between a native man and a wretched white man, and by depicting or by giving us the directly during the conference, the minister's speech, and the narrator's point of view, who attended that conference, because by the narrator is also working as as an officer with the ministry, or just as an agent in the ministry. So he witnesses with his own eyes the hell that is going on, these contradictions that are going on especially between what the ministers are promising, and between the brutal realities that the Africans or the minorities suffer from. Okay, so this is very much and very well pictured in the novel. Now,